Hey guys, Philipp Schaedler here, your local real estate agent in Los Angeles. And yesterday we finally closed my most complicated real estate transaction so far. It is a listing in Santa Monica for $1,295,000. And we had multiple offers up to 1.4. And even at 1.4, we had more individuals wanting to see the place. However, the seller decided to accept an offer that was on the table with a prepaid 5-year leaseback. And this is where things got a bit complicated because the buyer submitted a lease with the RPA, with the residential purchase agreement, which basically was not enforceable because the buyer is not the owner until the close of escrow. So I had to inform the buyer of that fact and told the buyer that we have a form, the RLAS, that basically ushers in a non-owner into ownership, into landlord. And however, that form is traditionally not used for a 5-year leaseback. It's usually used for 2 or 3 months because it's only a 1 or 2 page document. So the buyer did not want to include the RLS in the RPA, in the residential purchase agreement. The seller was pushing me and said, "Get this deal done already." So now I was stuck, and I talked to the attorneys at the California Association of Realtors for a week, every day. Felt like Groundhog Day. 4 different attorneys, and they were all great. And with the help of my broker team, Debbie, and also my amazing mentor and also broker, Sandy Hogan, and my lender, Kat Whitman, even though it was a cash deal, a lot of lender issues arose. We got this thing kind of unstuck once I had the idea one morning to ask the seller if the seller would be okay with selling the property, closing escrow, and then the buyer and seller do a lease outside of escrow. And surprisingly, the seller actually agreed to this and of course had to sign a form acting against broker's advice because the seller is no longer protected at this point. And that could be a big issue. Because the 5-year leaseback was part of the purchase agreement or price. So that was one way to get unstuck. And again, with the help of everybody, and I have to say too, the buyer side, Lori Piper at Compass on Montana Avenue, they've just been amazing. I mean, they were so great to work with, and it's probably because of them that things went smoother, because it couldn't have gotten a lot more complicated, because the deal was already very complicated. So that was one situation that needed to get unstuck. The other one was that shortly before we scheduled to close escrow, the buyer who was vesting title as an LLC decided to vest title as an individual. So now a lot of forms had to be redone, re-signed, reinitialed, and again, the buyer side did it in record time, I think in a day. And so then another situation arose where a government letter was required in order to close escrow. And that letter was apparently sent from the agency but never arrived. So we're waiting day after day after day. And then I asked escrow something, because we were stuck again, and I figured we have to be resourceful here. We have to think of something how we get unstuck, because this was just very unusual. So I asked the escrow company something that I didn't know was legal or possible. I said, is it possible to hold back the seller's proceeds, close escrow, and then deal with the seller's proceeds once that letter comes in? Escrow said it's a possibility. Let me ask title. Title did a risk assessment, and then title did an indemnity with the seller who signed, and that is actually how we were able to close escrow. So it was a very complex and complicated deal. At the time, my hair was sticking straight up, and I was pulling up my hair. But and overall, I'm glad I went through it because I gained a lot of knowledge and also formed some really great relationships, again, with the buyer side. Can't say good enough things about them. They send me a nice testimonial on my website, and I can only say the same things about them. And I'll do a transaction with them, a real estate transaction. Would love to do a transaction with them anytime. Anyway, at the end, seller is happy, buyer is happy, and that is the goal. So that was my craziest real estate transaction so far. More later.